Mr. Bonney here with our next botany lesson, this time on roots, which are, of course, one of the major plant organs. And so let's get into talking about what are the functions of roots. One of the main functions of roots is anchorage, or basically holding the plant into place. And I love this image here of this dandelion. You can see the root structure that's within it and all the branching and just how strong that dandelion holds itself into the ground. If you've ever tried to pull weeds, specifically tried to pull dandelions, you've noticed that they are quite challenging to remove because of how well they're held into the ground. And so the anchorage is one of the major functions of roots. Another is for storage. This image is good here because it shows lots of different types of foods that we consume where there's a lot of storage in the roots for these plants. You know, from the beets to the carrots, the potatoes, these are plants that have committed the storage of extra nutrients down into their roots. Then finally, the last major function of roots is water absorption. So water will come in through the roots and then up through the stems and then out into the leaves where photosynthesis can happen. Also, nutrients get pulled up in this same way as well, and typically those nutrients are coming in with the water. So nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium, those come in through the roots as well. So really absorption is the better way of describing this. There's two major varieties of roots, taproots and fibrous roots. And taproots they're found in dicot plants, so plants that when they sprout, they have two seed leaves. These roots generally have one or a few roots that are much larger than the others, with smaller ones branching off of it. So if you think of the type of root, like for example, what we just saw with that dandelion, it is a taproot, or a carrot would be a taproot as well. Most varieties of trees that you're familiar with, any of the flowering hardwood trees like an oak or a maple, those all have taproots. Whereas fibrous roots, these are the types of roots that you find in monocots, where they have all relatively small and the same size roots. They'll have many of them. These would be the types of roots that you find in, say, for example, grass. Take a look at the anatomy of the root. We're going to look at two images here. First, the one on the left is a longitudinal image of a root, and it's a drawing. And then the one over the right is a microscopic image, and it's a cross-section of a root. We'll look at each one of these individually. We'll start with the longitudinal one. Let's start with the root hairs, these structures that stick on the outside of the root, or on the outside of the epidermis. And they're there essentially just to increase the surface area of the root. By increasing the surface area, then therefore the root will have stronger anchorage and it'll have more surface area to absorb water. So these root hairs will line the entire outside of the root and, as I said, drastically increase the surface area. The epidermis is that single cell lining of cells that's on the outside of, well, every plant organ, and you can see it well here on this root. The root cap is a structure found right at the tip of the root. It's a protective structure. It protects the root as it grows. Think of it, as the root pushes through the dirt and soil, there's going to be rocks and things that will cause friction. That root cap, being composed mostly of dead cells, will provide protection to the root as it gets longer. Speaking of getting longer, the apical meristem, this is the area of active cell division. So this is where mitosis is taking place, right here at the tip of the root. This also happens at the tip of stems as well. The cortex is the tissue that's found, it's in this light blue color right here. You can find it just inside of the epidermis and outside of the endodermis, more on that in a minute. But the ground tissue, or the cortex as we like to call it, is mostly just filling space. It's made of parenchyma cells, and they're just there really much to take up space to make the root larger. The vascular cylinder is everything, including the endodermis and inside of it. So the endodermis, the xylem, and the phloem, and then the remaining filling cells in between it. And really, the vascular cylinder's job is to contain and withhold the vascular tissue, which moves materials around inside of the plant. The phloem is a type of vascular tissue that moves the sugary substances, or its food, and the xylem moves its water around. You can tell in this image here, the xylem have larger vessels to be able to move water, and the phloem are a bit smaller. The endodermis is this layer of cells that surrounds the vascular cylinder right here, and it contains a piece that's called the Casparian strip, more in a minute. But if you notice the name endo means inside and dermis is a covering. So if you look at epidermis versus endodermis, epi means outside, endo means inside. So the epidermis is an outside covering, the endodermis is an inside covering, and it completely surrounds the vascular cylinder. Speaking of that Casparian strip, here's an image zoomed in on it. These tan cells here would be the cells that make up the endodermis, with this black grayish strip here being the Casparian strip. What it allows for is one-way flow of water and nutrients from the outside and then in, but they can't go back out. So it keeps all of those materials right within the vascular cylinder so they can be drawn up. This helps to generate concentration gradients. Here's a cross-section of a root. This is a dicot root, but you can see some of those root hairs over here, these structures that stick on the outside. There's just a few of them shown in this image here. The epidermis is that outer layer of cells, that protective layer of cells. The cortex then is everything inside of the epidermis, but then outside of the endodermis. The vascular cylinder is the entire inside of this root and contains the endodermis, the xylem, and phloem. Here is the endodermis, that protective layer that has the Casparian strip right there. The xylem in this case are the larger openings, the larger vessels, and its job is to transport water. And the phloem are these green colored cells that transport sap or nutrients around. I know this is a dicot root because the xylem takes a specific pattern. In this case, in the middle, it forms a cross-shaped pattern. And then speaking of comparing monocot and dicot roots, over here on the left, I have a dicot root, and you can see that cross or X pattern visible in the middle where its vascular tissue is. So the xylem would be these large cells here, and then the phloem would be the cells in between it. Here's some phloem here and here and here and here. On the monocot root, what they do is they form a ring of vascular tissue. These larger openings right here, these are all the xylem, and then these smaller ones that are just outside of it would form the phloem. So the monocot root has a distinct cylinder form or ring-like structure to its vascular tissue. All of the other parts are the same. We've got the epidermis here and here, the cortex here and here, endodermis here, endodermis here. So all of the other structures are the same. Really, the only difference we see between these two types of root is just the pattern of their vascular tissue in the middle. And that's everything for roots.